Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Brian Crombie show on Canada One TV. For those of you that have been following me on either Canada One TV or on my radio show on Saga 960, you might be surprised by this because I'm going to do a little bit something different tonight. I'm going to be talking to you directly myself, not interviewing someone. And the reason why is because I want to tell you a little bit about why I've chosen to put my name forward as a candidate for Mississauga Lakeshore in the upcoming provincial election for a party that probably none of you have ever heard of, called the None of the Above Party. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that I've got the experience and the qualifications to make a pretty good representative for you, and I'm going to describe that a little bit if I could. Second of all, I really believe in the tenets that this political party, this unknown political party stands for, which is direct democracy. And the third reason is because I really have become, over the course of the last little while, very disillusioned with the mainstream parties. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And finally, because I've got some policy issues that I really want to talk about, and I'm going to stress during the election, and I'm going to chat about them a little bit tonight. So first of all, why do I think that I'm someone that you should consider? And if you've been following me, I think I'm reasonably articulate. I've had the opportunity to interview over 1,000 people over the course of the last 2.5 years that I've had my show on Canada One TV and my radio show on Saga 960. And they've been political people, they've been business people, they've been scientists, they've been entrepreneurs, they've been development people, they've been lawyers, they've been lifestyle people, they've been a whole slew of different people from across the political spectrum and the business spectrum, industrial spectrum, etc., and I've learned a lot from them. And it's been, an incredibly unique opportunity. I'm a very social individual, and during COVID-19, we all had to stay home. And my two shows have really kept me connected with people, and I've really enjoyed that. I've got a really good, I think, academic background, business background, and community background. Let me tell you a little bit. Actually, a political background is too. Let me tell you a little bit about each one of those if I could. I graduated near the top of my class at University of Western Ontario Business School. I got the top award they give out at Harvard Business School, where I got my MBA. And I'm right now completing a doctorate in business at a school called the International School of Management in Paris, France. I've had taken courses in the United States, in China, and it's been an unbelievable opportunity. And I'm studying and researching and writing my thesis on economic development in different clusters, which is what Mississauga, Toronto are all about. Second of all, I've got really good business experience. I've been in business for over 40 years. I've worked for different companies. I worked for the Walt Disney Company when I first graduated from Harvard in Los Angeles, California, and did a lot of business not only in LA but in Florida and Paris, France, on amusement parks and films and everything that the Walt Disney Company is in. I spent 7 years actually, working for the Molson companies in a succession of different finance, corporate development, investor relations jobs. I worked for Jim Pattison in Vancouver, one of the richest, most successful businessmen in all of Canada, and had the experience of doing acquisitions and financings and strategy studies for Jimmy, one of the best bosses I've ever had. I spent 7 years at Bioval Corporation as Chief Financial Officer and Head of Strategy and Corporate Development. An incredible opportunity working for a really fascinating gentleman by the name of Eugene Melnick. I've been Chief Financial Officer for the Ottawa Senators hockey team. Really quite an interesting opportunity, and today I'm the Chief Operating Officer for a real estate development company with assets across Canada and the United States. So I think I've got really relevant business experience, which I think you need some people that have got that kind of business experience in Queen's Park. I got political experience. I've been a riding president in Toronto, West Vancouver, and Mississauga. I've been involved in political campaigns in all three levels of government, provincially, federally, and municipally. My great uncle was actually Premier of Ontario in the 1940s, and so I grew up learning about politics. And finally, I've been very involved in the community. In 2007, Hazel McCallion, the former mayor of Mississauga, asked me to co-found and co-chair the Mississauga City Summit, which I did for 7 years. And then I, for 7 years, sat on the board of the Mississauga Arts Council, first as the vice president and then as the president of that Arts Council. Today, I'm chair of the Transit Alliance, a civic advocacy organization in the GTA for transit investments and to really advocate for more transit investment in our cities. And as I've said, I've been a radio host on Saga 960 and a TV host on Canada One TV. So, very involved in the community. Let me tell you about why the None of the Above Party and direct democracy, and why I've become disillusioned. I think that our mainline parties, the local representatives, really don't make much of a difference anymore All that matters is who the leader is and who the party is. And people have forgotten who the local representatives are. And the local representatives have forgot, I think, too often what their job is. They do what the leader and the whip tells them to do, not necessarily what their local constituents want them to do. And I think our political system that was really structured back, 200 years ago, and think about the name a riding, why it was called a riding. A riding was because that was how far a horse could travel in half a day. That's the distance that a riding was created for. It's got no comparison today. We could not have direct democracy. We could not be involved in our political decision making 200 years ago. But with media, communications, the internet, etc., we could have a system today where you, the public, are far more involved in what's going on in day-to-day decision making. And so the none of the above party is all about three different things: referendum, recall, and real accountability. The referendum, the United States, Switzerland, 50 countries around the world have either referendum or recall, and they work. People get scared about the referendums, but then on really big decisions like Quebec separation, you put a referendum in place, or frankly changing the electoral system. So we acknowledge that referendums are really important for those really important decisions. Well, why aren't they used far more often? Switzerland hands out a booklet every year, and you decide on a whole bunch of issues, and then you also vote on the issues that you want to decide in the future. 75% of referendums that get put forward by people actually get passed. Not that many by special interest groups get passed, and then the majority of those actually get turned down in subsequent referendums when they've got to be ratified. And so over time, people actually make the right decisions on these rules. And I think if we had that, we'd be far better off. I interviewed a person on the show that wanted to do it by way of an app on our telephones that would allow us to vote on a fairly regular basis. You think about polls, it's effectively an unofficial referendum. But we look at the polls to figure out what to do. And so we can have far more involvement in our decision-making process. And we don't need that representative democracy that we had before, because those representatives aren't doing what we want them to do. They're doing what the whip or the leader tells them to do, because that's how they get their jobs, that's how they get their promotions, that's how they get their committee appointments, that's how they get the fancy trips. And so I think we've got something better in that that we could achieve. Recall. The United States has recall. Numerous different countries around the recall. And what recall is if you get a whole bunch of signatures, and call it 25,000 might be the signatures you would need in a constituency or a riding, you can actually have a vote to recall the electorate, recall the representative. And people say, well, why? The reason why is that too often when you make the decision on election day for a provincial or a federal party, you just vote the brand, you vote the name, you vote the party, you vote for the leader. You don't make a decision on that local person. And if they're corrupt, or if they're making a mistake, or if they're not doing their job, there should be a way of disciplining them and getting rid of them halfway through. And it's almost like a by-election where the attention is then finally all on the local person. And you may have seen last year California had a recall election. The whole nation was focused on what was going on. And the incumbent governor actually won, which was interesting. So he proved that he deserved to keep the job, and people voted for him. But the fact that you had to focus in on one person for one election day on whether they had the right to keep the job was really helpful. It's a really important discipline. What they find in studies is that even just announcing you're going to try to do a recall improves the performance of the local representative dramatically. And if you don't do recall, have term limits. I was in Dallas, Texas just last week, and a city councilor that I was meeting with just had left his job because he was past his 8-year term limit. And he said it's the best thing possible because everyone then wants to do a good job because they know they got to go out and get another job in a different jurisdiction at a different level thereafter, rather than just relying on their incumbency. And so I think term limits are a great idea. So referendum and/or recall and/or term limits, I think, can make a ton of sense. And then finally, I want to tell you a little bit about the policies that I want to stand for, because I think that we've had a real problem where too often the mainstream parties today are thinking about gimmicks like $1 a day beer, $1 a day transit, free dental care, no tolls on highways. They're gimmicky. They're trying to buy your votes when I think we've got some major problems. Let me tell you my first problem, which is, I think, fiscal prudence and my worry about fiscal non-sustainability. We know that interest rates are going up. Inflation is already above 5%. And why is it? It's because we've had this incredible amount of increased deficits and therefore debt in the last couple of years, justifiable to a certain extent because of the pandemic. The problem is it's going to continue based on the current projections, either federally or provincially. And that's wrong. When unemployment is at the lowest level it's ever been, when the stock market is at a high, when housing prices are high, that's the time that Keynesian economics said, take the punch bowl away, let the party cool down. We should have let the party cool down before it got overheated the way it is. And what's happened, because it's got overheated, the central bank is going to make sure that we take the punch bowl away by increasing interest rates. I interviewed just last week the chief economist of a major think tank in Ottawa that used to be with the Parliamentary Budget Office, and he said that if the government institutes pharmacare, where budget is not our budget is not financially sustainable, that we're going to have a peso crisis comparable to what Canada was faced with in the 1990s. We need to bring fiscal sanity to our budget right now. And the problem is, in an election campaign, you've got all these different parties that are campaigning to win your votes, and they're all recommending things that are unsustainable. Even the provincial Conservative Party said they probably wouldn't reintroduce their budget because any fiscal conservative knows their last budget was not fiscally conservative, wasn't fiscally responsible. And so we need to bring sanity to our fiscal situation. Number two, I think our affordability crisis is reaching a level that's just unheard of. And it's going to be disciplined by probably interest rates going up and therefore housing prices going down, when the real solution is greater supply. Government is the problem here, not the solution. What has happened is our municipal governments haven't instituted official plans and zoning and building permits needed enough to house our population. Build, the Canadian, the Ontario organization that represents the construction industry, the building industry, says we've had 50,000 less homes per year built than we need. And the federal government is going to approve 430,000 immigrants coming into Canada in the next couple of years. The population the size of the city of Montreal is moving to Toronto in the next 10 years. Where are we going to house them? We have to dramatically increase supply. And if you don't want to have your housing prices crash and you want to have affordability such that people can actually move into homes somewhere close to Toronto, not have to move to the 705 and the 519 to get a home, we need to increase supply. And that increased supply, there's a recent Ontario task force that came forward with 55 recommendations. Only like 6 of them were instituted in a bill by the Ontario government, and only the easy ones. The difficult ones haven't been instituted yet. What we need is radical change in the way that the provincial government enforces affordability and supply on municipal governments, and radical change in the way municipalities approve housing. I've been in the beer industry, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry, I've been in the real estate industry. The real estate industry should be, and people think of it as very entrepreneurial. There are more regulations there than almost anywhere, where a local politician or a local planning person can tell you, this is the height, this is the doors, these are the garages, this is the bike racks you need, this is the number of parking spots you need. The regulation and the time it takes to implement that regulation and review things is way too long. We need more supply. And we've got the land and the density opportunities in the Greater Toronto Area to have that, but governments aren't supplying that. Third of all, I think the biggest tragedy in the last couple of years has been long-term care homes. And the mortality rates in the long-term care homes has been atrocious. And we have one party that says get rid of private long-term care. That's a mistake. That's a simplistic answer. The difference between high mortality and low mortality hasn't been for-profit versus not-for-profit. It's been really good HVAC systems and good health standards and quality standards. After SARS, we had a judicial inquiry about what went wrong in SARS in long-term care. We didn't institute the changes. We need to institute those changes, which are better ventilation and better health and safety, both for not-for-profit as well as for-profit, and it's something we need to change. Because really what we've been doing, let's admit it, we've been warehousing the aged in unsafe environments, and that's why we've had the higher mortality. One other issue I want to talk about, which I'm really fervent about, is transit. We need more investment in transit, and we need not just the big investment in big ticket announcements like the Ontario line, which is important, but the little ones, like fare flexibility. In London, if you go after 10 o'clock, the fares go down by half. $1 a fare all day long is not the solution, because you'll have too many people in the peaks and you'll have to build for those peaks. But $1 in off hours, or for seniors in off hours, or for students in off hours, or for everyone in off hours makes sense. We have differential pricing in hotels, we have differential pricing in airlines. Why don't we have differential pricing during the day in our transit system? Fare rationalization based on trip length. all-day, two-way, frequent GO train service on all the lines. The NEPSIS report said that the Milton-Mississauga line has an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio if we actually made it all-day, two-way, frequent, every 15-minute service. But it's, 6 trains down in the morning, 6 trains back in the evening, and we haven't done the things we need to get it done. There's a train that goes up to Bolton that could get rid of the need for the 413. There is old freight tracks around Toronto that we could use to put in place a great transit system that Chicago is doing. I was in Dallas last week. Dallas is doing, that New York is doing, that frankly LA is actually doing, believe it or not, that we could be doing in Toronto. So that's why I want you to consider voting for an independent voice. Someone that is running for a party you've never heard of, because I've got the business experience, I've got the political experience, I've got the community experience, I've got the policies from a democracy standpoint that I stand for, and finally, I think I'm reasonably, policy smart and want to talk to you and institute, hopefully, some of the policies that I've talked about that I think are critical for this province to prosper in the future. Thanks for listening to me. That's the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV for tonight. Good night, everybody.